I am a woman who was recently released from prison. Ask your questions. I spent 3.5 years in prison in one of the US states. I am 40 years old. I am a single heterosexual woman who has never been married. I have some college education and no children. By prison standards, my profile made me a real unicorn, a unique case. I have one trait, or maybe a flaw. I am obsessed with the truth. While most women in prison tend to live in a world of lies, fantasies, and self-deception, a women's prison is nothing like what people imagine it to be. Ask your questions and I'll tell you how things really are in there. Are there many cases of being forced into intimacy in prison? What were you in for? When were you released? Are people actually being forced into intimacy there? No, there were not really any incidents of outright physical violence, although I did hear from 2 girls that they were either coerced or perhaps tricked into it. And the details are completely absurd. Women, of course, do meet each other and make new girlfriends. Don't know, but most often it is based on dependency and financial matters. As strange as it may sound, in the 2 women's prisons in my state, having a girlfriend or a trans guy is considered a status symbol. In reality, it's pathetic and disgusting. By the way, one girl got pregnant by a god and then bragged about it. The god was prosecuted criminally, but for 2 years now, his case still hasn't gone to court and he's currently in custody. Tragically, the young girl herself passed away from a drug overdose. Just 2 short weeks after she somehow magically got early release. The prison was clearly doing everything it could to cover its tracks, because any intimacy in prison is technically considered rape, and they were trying to avoid a lawsuit they would almost certainly lose. I have a ton of really nasty and wild stories about intimate relationships in prison. What were you in for? Assaulting a police officer under aggravating circumstances. When did you get out? January 25th, 25. What did you feel when you first got off the prison bus? Did fights ever happen in prison? What was your favorite way to kill time? After I was convicted in the county jail, they took me for classification to another women's state prison, and it wasn't a bus, but the sheriff's pickup truck. About a month and a half later, I was transferred to the prison where I served most of my sentence, and I went there in a minivan. Both times I was in a small group of girls being transported. They kept us in the medical unit for several hours, processed paperwork, took our photos, and checked our personal belongings. All that bureaucratic crap. The first day in both prisons is nothing but waiting, zero information, and you don't see the other inmates. On top of that, both of my first days were followed by a mandatory 2-week quarantine. Since the pandemic was still raging, everything felt incredibly boring and uneventful. My favorite pastime was playing various card games. I also liked watching TV and spending time in the yard. In the cupcake prison, as I call it, there were surprisingly few fights. In the men's prison in my state, fights happen every day, but in ours, there might be one every 2 or 3 months. But if a fight did break out, it was serious. Here are some examples of such high-profile incidents. A group of 9 women got into a fight over money, e-cigarettes, and girls. The scuffle looked more like a riot, but the whole thing looked ridiculous. These clowns were trying to act tough. One woman hit another in the face with a padlock while I was sitting a meter away from them, peacefully reading a newspaper. The junkie who buried a war veteran alive and pleasured a dog for a fix, there really is a video of her, spat at someone, and they dragged her by the hair for about 10 meters and beat her up brutally. They knocked out the only rotten tooth she had left in her mouth. Everyone in prison considered her literally the most disgusting person of all, and there was no shortage of candidates. 3 weeks later, she spat at someone again, and an old lady in a wheelchair attacked her, grabbing her by the hair. A fight broke out. One trans woman beat up another because she stole her cup. I told the gods that it was all my witch magic. Supposedly, I cast a spell to make that fight happen because a couple of weeks earlier she had pissed me off with her audacity. A woman weighing nearly 270 kilos kicked another inmate in the shin, and in response, the other stabbed her in the neck with a pen. And it was hilarious because the pen barely even pierced the skin. There was also an incident the day before I was released. I had just left the cafeteria. A fight broke out between 3 inmates. That was the only fight in the cafeteria during my entire time there. It started because of jealousy over a girlfriend. There was another incident before that. A new guard, transferred from a men's prison, threw a girl to the floor because she passed someone a muffin. That was just insane. A lot of people complained. He was suspended for a couple of weeks. They say the food in prison is terrible. Is that true? And if it is, how quickly do you get used to it? Well, it's nothing special. Prison food is never good, but my unique cupcake prison was known for having better than average food because the guards ate the same food as we did. The guards and the kitchen staff, where I only worked for a week by the way, of course, could pick out the best stuff. They always got the fresh tomatoes and cucumbers. While the rest of the inmates were provided with only simple lettuce leaves as a salad, the milk was frequently past its expiration date. The bread was stale and the meat was either not real, consisting of 90% soy and 10% meat, or it was processed meat scraps from the factory floor, which were labeled as NHC or NFHC. Not for human consumption. Not for human consumption. Instead of chicken, they served some strange wild bird from Australia. Almost everything was pre-packaged as semi-finished products. All the food was the cheapest possible, but still edible enough that even the gods could eat it. In one of the district detention centers where I was held, the food was much worse. Once we arrived there, they served us these pink, slime-like noodles with meat that smelled exactly like dirty socks soaked in old cat urine. As for the second question, the food was edible enough that I got used to it fairly quickly. I was actually lucky. There were people on the outside who sent me money so I could afford spices and seasonings, especially cheese sauce for potatoes, whether baked or sliced, and packets of ranch dressing for salads, chicken, and so on. How accurate, or rather inaccurate, is the TV series about women's prison Orange is the New Black? As far as I remember, the events of that series take place in a federal prison, which is already a big difference. I think I only watched it up to the 4th or 5th season. Racial groups really do tend to stick together. Contraband made its way inside extremely rarely. There were cases where guards, both men and women, got involved with or slept with inmates, but that was also very rare. We had jobs in prison industries. Where I was incarcerated, we manufactured and assembled eyeglass frames for all the prisons in the state, supposedly even for various juvenile facilities, charitable organizations, and so on. There was a knitting and sewing program for Christmas. We made hats and mittens for children in need. The actual housing system was quite different from what was shown in the television series. The main part of the prison was located on the grounds of a former college, and even before that, it was a hotel. Consequently, the blocks resembled old dormitories with 3 to 10 people per room and a shared bathroom, much like you might find at a Walmart. One building still maintained the original hotel format with private bathrooms, while another was more like an office space with partitions. And the newest building is a typical men's prison facility with heavy metal doors, bunk beds, and a toilet combined with a sink. We used to have a greenhouse and a vegetable garden, but many years ago our funding was cut. Fights were very rare, and both the staff and the inmates seemed to be playing out the vibe of some kind of finishing school. It was strange. However, in reality, the series Orange is the New Black isn't that far from the truth. What methods for rehabilitation and opportunities to truly change were provided to you so that after release you could start a normal life? Education, courses, therapy. Was there anything like that? I ask because many people, once in prison, get stuck in that cycle. Not everyone, of course, but still. That's exactly the question I was waiting for. Rehabilitation, correction, it's all a complete fucking farce. If I'm not mistaken, in the prison where I was, 40% of inmates ended up back inside within the first 6 months. To be honest, a lot of the girls there are just trash and junkies, and they'll stay that way forever. That's the harsh truth. Almost everyone is required to go through a rehabilitation program, which is basically just a cult. On an official level, it was called a therapeutic community. But the reality was that addiction counselors subjected inmates to intense psychological abuse. It was terrible, but if you had ever drunk alcohol or smoked weed even once in your life, you were forced to attend, otherwise you were automatically denied the right to parole. There were no real methods there at all. Almost all the life skills courses were mandatory, but all the information in them was complete nonsense, having nothing to do with reality. This isn't education, it's brainwashing and propaganda. None of this works. It's complete crap and a hypocritical performance. To get through such a program, you just have to keep quiet, agree with everything, never express an alternative opinion, and never say anything positive about substances or alcohol. You just have to pretend that you understand everything and write down the right answers in your notebook, the ones the supervisor wants to hear from you, even if you think they're nonsense. It's mental abuse, psychological torture. For me, this was the most terrible aspect of being inside. Female offenders there are taught to be as fake and deceptive as possible, and this only leads to them becoming more skilled at manipulation and lying, which in turn leads to even more crimes. There were no actual courses available from the college program. This was partly because a huge number of people first had to go through basic adult education and pass the GED test, the high school equivalency diploma. 70% of the prison inmates were attending classes in literacy, reading, math, and so on. Prison is a complete circus, a lesbian summer camp for junkies. I am not at all surprised that so many people violate parole, commit new crimes, and ultimately end up living their lives on the installment plan. Literally, nothing here helps anyone. Yes, there are a few naive staff members who are genuinely kind and want to help, but the reality is junkies stay junkies. Most of the women inside are not only uneducated, but just plain stupid. Plus, the very poor people live in poverty. Rehabilitation is a lie. Although, to be honest, during my time in prison, I really did become a better criminal. They actually teach you that there, even if it's unintentional. Name 5 things you really wanted to do that you did right after being released. For example, what was the first thing you ate? Yes, I've already almost fulfilled my first 5 wishes. For the first meal, I wanted something Chinese, sushi, or seafood. In the end, I had some Chinese food and a bit of sushi. The first real cigarette was a Camel Silver with menthol. The first alcoholic drink was peach schnapps with ice. The very first cat I petted was Blee. Yes, I call her Blee. Actually, her name is Bella. I still don't have my first passport stamp for traveling abroad. Most likely, I'll end up traveling somewhere warm in the Caribbean. What was your daily routine? It went something like this. Wake up at 6:15, line up and roll call. Line up ends at 6:45, 6:45 to 8 o'clock is breakfast, 8 o'clock is work, morning walk in the yard, classes, and so on. 11 to 12 is lunch, 12:30 is roll call and line up, 1 o'clock is work, classes, and other activities. At 1:30, there's a walk in the yard. At 2 o'clock, the staff changes. From 2:30 to 3:30, there's another walk in the yard, work, and the end of classes. At 4 o'clock, there's roll call. At 4:30, roll call ends. From 4:30 to 5:30 is dinner. From 6 to 8 in the evening, there's an evening walk in the yard or free time in the common room, depending on the season. At 9 o'clock in the evening, there is an evening assembly and roll call. Even in my regular life, I never had a strict daily routine. I was used to living freely, doing what I wanted, when I wanted, or when I had time. My routine in prison changed many times because of my unusual circumstances. I was sent back to the county jail twice, even after being convicted by the state court. Several times I was transferred to different units. There were COVID quarantines, and stricter measures were imposed on the unvaccinated because the prison department was frustrated that they couldn't force us to get the vaccine. I spent time in solitary confinement and so on. Personally, I usually slept until 10 in the morning. In 2021, COVID rules were still in effect, so breakfast was brought in paper bags. By the middle of 2022, I hardly wanted to walk half a mile just to have breakfast. I would get up either at a random time, or if I had errands or an appointment, or on Wednesdays and Sundays, the days when they served eggs. I usually took a shower around 11:45. If I didn't make it in time, then it would be around 17:15 or 19:45. I almost always went out for the full 2 hours of the daytime walk in the yard. In the evening, I would either go out into the yard or to the common room. I usually went to bed around 1:30 at night. I listened to the radio, watched TV, and if I lived alone, I would also color or draw at night. For the guards, the most important things were meal times, roll calls, and shift changes. The entire rest of the schedule was adjusted around those. How tough were the women serving time for murder? Do you think you could handle someone like her? Note, in the video is Amber Ride, an American woman convicted of first-degree murder of her ex-boyfriend. Back in the year 2012, Amber Ride was convicted on all counts of first-degree murder and subsequently sentenced to serve life in prison. You're without the possibility of parole. Amber Ride? Oh, I could definitely take her, lol. I've even beaten up cops who went through Navy SEAL training. Most of the women in Cupcake Prison weren't tough at all, and many of the women doing time for murder were older and wouldn't have stood a chance in a fight. Almost all of their murders didn't happen in a fight. It was gun violence. Only 2 of the life sentence murder cases I know of weren't related to gun violence. A trans woman beat someone to death with a piece of sports equipment. And the second one is a disgusting, vile, uneducated drug dealer who dropped out of school in 8th grade, used a girl as a mule, and then brutally beat her to death with an extension cord and a blind rod. Just so you understand, this second one is already applying for parole in our state and will most likely get out, and most likely kill again. What surprised you the most during your time in prison? Honestly, without sarcasm. Just how incredible the number of useless, poor, manipulative junkies and scammers with zero prospects who got parole and came back literally just a few weeks later. One girl came back 7 times during the 3.5 years I was there, and in total she had returned to prison 10 times even before I arrived. But people like me and a couple of other perfectly normal women from the middle class, who weren't addicts or repeat offenders, we just got passed over. Some were given the full sentence, some were denied parole altogether. I still don't understand how that's possible. I get the feeling that the parole board got so caught up in their extremely politically correct drive for equal outcomes that they started punishing exactly those who would most likely have lived a normal life after release. They treat them more harshly than those who are 99% likely to come back. Ultimately, the goal of this whole system of prison departments and police is not to release people but to keep them dependent on the state. Such hypocrisy doesn't just outrage people like me. This state is deliberately making society unsafe. And this isn't a conspiracy, it's reality. All these agencies are securing jobs for themselves in the future. Repeat offenders are just an excuse to ask for a bigger budget, demand higher salaries, build new facilities, hire more staff, and so on. I've gone a bit beyond the specific prison, and I'm talking about the approach of the entire state. They sell society a beautiful fairy tale about rehabilitation and reform, but in reality they do exactly the opposite. They raise more skilled liars, thieves, manipulators, and criminals. Fact. Did you make any friends or acquaintances in prison with whom you'd like to keep in touch? Yes, I'm already corresponding with one of them. I want to write to a few more acquaintances. And to be honest, I would absolutely love to write a couple of angry letters to a few disgusting scumbags I met there. Why haven't I done that yet? In this prison and apparently throughout the state, there's a rule. Former inmates can't write to those who are still inside. That's why I use a pseudonym, a made-up name, and a return address that isn't mine. The incoming mail still ends up reaching me. But I can't use the same fictitious address or name twice. There are now only 2 viable options remaining for me. Get a P.O. box or request that other people allow me to receive letters at their home under a fictitious name. But even here there's a rule. 1 letter from 1 inmate per address. unless it's family. For example, a mother with 2 children in prison. I also wrote on social media to several people I was incarcerated with, those I managed to find. Did your time in prison affect your relationships with friends and family? Was it hard to return to normal life? What emotions and experiences did you face and maybe still face to this day? And what did you like most about prison? I'll answer in reverse order. What I liked most in prison was playing cards. My favorite game is Pinochle, but we played others too. I also enjoyed coloring and drawing together. Anger. The strongest feeling I still struggle with is anger, injustice, confusion, hatred, a deep inner hatred toward those who treated me so treacherously. There wasn't really much for me to worry about because I was lucky. My parents built a hangar and everything I owned was stored there. While I was inside, 2 of my 6 cats died and my brother crashed my car. Those were the biggest losses. It's strange to hear people say return to society. Even the government uses that wording. Like, what, do I stop being a human being in prison? Are prisoners not people? I don't mean any harm, I'm just being ironic about the term. Personally, it wasn't hard for me to come back. In this regard, I was luckier than many others. It's only been 3 months, but overall, I'm doing fine. I managed to recall almost all my website passwords, re-downloaded Pokemon Go, and resumed my progress exactly where I had left off. Right now, I'm working in an unofficial capacity at my brother's metalworking shop. I'm almost certain that no agency or decent company will ever hire me again. I'm out of luck with work for the rest of my life, and even my diploma won't really help me anymore. On my very first day of freedom, I bought myself some booze, peach schnapps, don't judge me, and raised a glass to give a big fuck you to those bastards who stole from me something you can't buy with money, time. Yeah, it's that same anger again. I've always been a lone wolf. I had acquaintances, but in reality, outside of my family, I only had 2 true friends. Judging by who wrote to me and sent me money, I realized that people have the memory span of a fly. Plus, when I got locked up in 2021, it was the height of COVID, so that made everything even more complicated. Almost all of my acquaintances literally forgot about me. Bar friends, work friends, friends from social networks, from Pokemon Go. I'm still processing all of this, but in the end, it turns into a vicious circle. Someone asks, oh, where have you been? It's like you disappeared off the face of the earth. And I think to myself, I don't even want to tell most of them where I've been for the past 3 years. So with this, specifically this moment of misunderstanding, I'm still struggling. I'm alone, no kids, lived by myself, so there weren't really any household family problems, except for how much I had to pay for a decent lawyer. That was the most painful part in the family, mostly because of my parents, who were always terribly stingy assholes and believed that money solves everything. The cats stayed with my brother. I thought I'd get at most a year, but they gave me 3.5. The cats are still with him, and that suits me just fine. They like it there. I visit them sometimes. It's always nice to hear when someone gets out. I work as a supervisor in a dormitory for male inmates who have been released on parole, and I've long wanted to understand how working with women is different. I've heard it's a completely different experience. How's the atmosphere in a women's prison? What's the mindset there? Thank you. Freedom is a thrill. I've also heard that things are different in men's prisons. I'm honestly curious about how things are over there. I often joked with the guards, like, transfer me to a men's prison. I hate this cupcake prison. The staff there really think that the cupcake prison is a utopia. I'm not joking. One time I was coming back from a trip outside the zone, and a guard was seriously telling the sheriff how this place saves lives, and that some women don't want to leave because it's better here than on the outside. 99% of the time, that's a lie. When you have no freedom and every step you take is controlled by a bunch of strangers, that's not help, that's violence. Simple and clear. But the staff themselves believe what they're saying. Their heads are buried in the sand, they're living in the clouds. It's amazing how they genuinely think they're doing something good, not harm. Most of them aren't evil, they're just completely disconnected from reality and the consequences. But the mindset among the inmates is different. A land of fantasy, a world of lies, delusion, despair, and permissiveness. These drug addicts lie to themselves, the guards, the parole board, and those who decide their fate. They feel the world owes them everything. Those who don't die from an overdose end up coming back, usually within the standard cycle of 6. This is a term. It means returning within 6 months. Women in prison lie, they just always lie. The main survival strategy is to be as fake as possible. You know the expression, fake it till you make it? Well, that was definitely invented by a woman. I didn't fit into that herd mentality. My whole approach was to be the complete opposite of fake, so after I got out of prison, I did well, and those who were fake either ended up coming back or died of an overdose. Women in prison spent so much time lying to each other just for the sake of it. At least, that's how it seemed to me. They were always gossiping, bad-mouthing each other behind their backs, and being fake polite to each other's faces. People like me, real, straightforward, those who aren't afraid to tell the truth and call out lies, were a threat to them. Telling someone to their face about their crime or looking at the situation soberly was considered impolite. I don't understand why, and I don't want to. I don't care about politeness in a damn prison. I'm a nurse at a correctional facility in California. So, in your opinion, what could I do better? And congratulations on your release. Thank you. If you're competent, provide the necessary information, and are just pleasant to talk to, I think that's all people really want. Be the best version of yourself every day. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's absolutely true. The only real significant medical challenge I faced in prison that wasn't about money, politics, or the usual prison mess was that I was wrongfully and falsely accused of begging for pills and faking pain, and all because of a hellish toothache that radiated throughout my whole body. Although, to be fair, I understand why they thought that. Almost everyone in prison is an addict. Now here's a story that's not related to your question, but I want to get it off my chest. For several weeks, my tooth was at a stage where it couldn't be saved anymore. It was the worst pain of my life, and I still feel echoes of it to this day. A terrible, unbearable pain similar to sciatic nerve pain, or at least how I imagine it. The pain went from my jaw to my neck, shoulders, sides, and lower back. I cried for weeks. My cellmate was unable to sleep a wink all night because I was suffering in such extreme agony. All because of an abscess caused by a cavity that could have been saved if they had simply provided a basic filling. But the dental department flatly refused to drain the abscess, give me any antibiotics, or even put in a filling. Even though I complained about this tooth for 3 years, I usually had to lie to the medical staff and say I had sinusitis just to get antibiotics. But the joke is, I actually did have it because the infection from the tooth had spread to my sinuses. So maybe it wasn't really a lie after all. 4 months before I was released, they finally pulled the tooth. I held out as long as I could, but the pain became unbearable. Honestly, I'm even a bit ashamed that I lost a tooth. Even though it was a back tooth. I don't have insurance yet, but I'm thinking about getting an implant. But I turned that shame into anger. Now I can honestly, backed by facts, tell the world just how disgusting this entire prison system is, and how barbarically the state behaves. It is shocking that part of my rehabilitation, correction, and punishment was to lose a tooth and not receive any dental medical care for 3 years and 4 months. Isn't that a cruel and unthinkable punishment? How did that make my life or society better and safer? To be completely honest, the medical staff in the prison where I was held were generally not bad. Even in one of the 2 district jails, the medical staff were decent, but in the other it was pure hell. Constant insults and threats. And once, they told me that they would hold me down by force and shove a COVID test swab so deep into my nose that it would reach my brain. All because during COVID, the state was allowed to do anything, including threats, the use of electric shock, and forced medical procedures. Unfortunately, this is not made up. This is how the medical staff behaved in the Bradford County Jail, Pennsylvania. It was a truly traumatic experience. Thank you very much for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you think about our heroine. And don't forget to check out our other videos. Hugs. Bye.